Hello and welcome to another episode of the NK Active podcast. Really excited about a guest this month. We have Dr. Jessica Leitch on board, who is a runner and did also hold a world record, which she can tell you about. But then she's also a founder of Run3D. So this episode is all going to be about running and gait analysis. So I thought there's no better guest to get on board than Jessica because she's a runner and she's got a big interest in gait analysis. Now, a bit of a disclaimer, as it were, I am a Run3D user at NK Active. We've been using it for 6, 7 years. And then more recently, I am now on the board of directors. So I thought I would just make that clear for you listening. So, Jess, many thanks for coming on and having this chat to us. Sort of give us a bit of background about your journey so far.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Nick. I am a very keen runner. I kind of never did it at school, just got into it later on when I was 18, decided I was going to run the marathon, discovered I was quite good at it. Then went to study engineering at Oxford and got heavily involved in the cross-country scene. So it's always been a really big part of my life. And being an engineer, and when you combine that with running, you kind of get into the field of biomechanics. So my interests of what I do now and kind of, throughout the last 20 years have really been driven by this underlying love I have of just being outside and putting one step or one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. And then see, because it's really interesting. What I love chatting to you about is that you're not a clinician by grad, you are an engineer by background. It's just the way you think is different to the way us clinicians can think at times. It's just that very logical problem solving brain that you tend to have. But we'll come on to the gait bit first. But obviously you got two little ones as well. That didn't stop you from running, did it? And what's the world record that you had? And then also who stole the world record from you?
I did have two,
Two.
actually, and I now only have the one. But I've just rewind a little bit to explain the story. So I'm highly competitive. Okay, I love to race. I'm not brilliant at running, but probably kind of high end club level. And I've always loved to compete. And I then had a baby. And I was like, now what am I going to do now? I still want to race. I still want to be competitive. My husband, however, is an orthopedic surgeon, so he's not around a lot. So I was like, okay, I have a little baby. I bought a running buggy, as every runner does when they have a little baby. I know you've got one as
Yeah.
well, Nick. And I thought that's fine. I'll just buggy run. And then I was like, I need a challenge. Okay, I need something to focus on. The weekly park runs I still love and I still do them, but I just wanted something a little bit bigger. So I thought, I'll run a marathon with a buggy. That sounds like a really good idea. And then someone said to me, well, why don't you try and get the world record? I was like, that is also a really good idea. I'll do that. So I signed up to the Abingdon Marathon. I told them that I was going to try and run a world record. I only had one child at this point. And we did. So we ran 3:17, I think it was, with little Daniel. And the publicity, Nick, you probably saw it all. At that point, buggy running really wasn't very big. So I was kind of frowned upon by local people, my neighbors. What is this crazy girl doing going out running with a buggy? And so it kind of received this wave of publicity. We were in everything, the Times, the Telegraph. I think we were on BBC Morning News and things like that. Since then, actually, buggy running has become more popular, so I get a lot less or lesser odd looks than I did when we started. And then I had baby number two and thought, well, why not? We'll do it with two. And so we also got the world record for running it with a double buggy. Again, we did Abingdon, nice flat course, because any buggy runner out there will know that running flat is okay, running hills, absolute disaster. So I needed to find a flat course. So I still actually have the double one, I think 3:22 that one was, but somebody broke my single one. So
Yeah.
Still a holder of one.
Yeah, it is that, but also you just gloss over 3:17 and 3:22. I think the majority of runners out there would be happy just to run a 3:17 marathon without pushing a human being at the same time. That's very impressive. And did who broke your record? Do you know?
I'm not sure who it was. I think it's an American lady and did it in like 3:05, I want to say, or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, just amazing. But I think, as you say, if you buggies these days, running buggies are pretty good pieces of equipment. I mean, if you find a flat course, you can actually hold a decent pace. Obviously, your babies have to be compliant as well, so you need to just pick the timing right when they're having a nap. But you can hold a decent pace unless you've got a lot of hills, and then it all goes to pot, basically.
Yeah, I remember during lockdown, I used to, for our daily exercises, to run and go see my mum in her garden and take the two little ones. And it was only about 6 or 7 K, so it wasn't long, but there was 1 kilometer of it was sort of up a hill
It
like that.
literally grind to a halt, right?
And it was just like I felt like my lungs were just to
Yeah.
exit my body. You get to the top, and the children are like, Daddy, why are you slowing down? What's wrong? Why are you stopping? I'm like, come on, kids, give me a break here, please.
I used to get, Mummy, why are you pulling funny faces? That was mine.
Yeah. Though what goes up must come down.
Yeah,
Going downhill at the time, I set one of my quickest kilometers on the because going downhill, you've got by the time I worked out when I had sort of a day's worth of food and clothes with me, 2 children, the buggy, it was around 50 kilos in
I
total.
know.
So you're sort of pushing 50 kilograms up a hill. So actually, when you think about it, it could be actually very good hill resistance strength training. Because
Yeah,
then actually, if you can run up a hill pushing 50 kilograms, you take that 50 kilos away and you run up a hill, you're going to fly up that thing, aren't you?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
But
really
I
good
think
training.
having that extra 50 kilos on wheels going downhill,
Can also be a bit dangerous,
I
right? My
yeah,
arms used to hurt a lot.
yeah. This is why I used to have two straps that physically held
Yeah,
onto the wrist. So if anything happened, I'd always maintain control because we all know actually the brakes on buggies they're just rubbish, aren't they? They don't
yeah.
really work that way. You press it and you're like, this isn't really slowing down, is it? They're not the best. Are you still running with the buggies now, or
No,
it's old enough?
we've moved on, Nick. We bike run now.
Yeah.
So again, my husband runs. And so what we do now is we go out on a Sunday, we have him at the front, two children on bikes in between, and me at the back, which also works really well. You need to find obviously a nice traffic-free route. I live in Bristol now, so we have a great route along the Bristol Bath cycleway, basically, which is completely traffic-free, nice and wide, and just goes on for 16 miles. So yeah, that's what we do now. So you've got that coming.
Yeah, I know that we've started that.
Oh, you've done it
Eldest,
already?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, done it on Sunday. It wasn't that far. It was only about 4K, but doing loops around our local park.
Yeah.
But Alexandra, yeah, she was happy on the bike, and I was just running around after her, mainly because she's just about learning how to use her brakes on her bike.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
there's a case of had to be careful when they're dogs that she just doesn't crash into a dog or something or a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
because so, but no, it's all good fun. So then obviously you then develop that love for running, and yeah, you say you're pretty good at it. I think you done a half marathon a couple of days ago, yesterday I think it was. That was a 1:25, wasn't it? So that's again a nice half marathon pace. So that's your love for running. But then how did you then sort of get into the gait analysis side of things?
Yeah, good question. So I was very lucky after finishing my degree in engineering. I was like, do you know what? I'm not really ready to go out to work. What can I do to stay at university? And I decided to read for a DPhil. I was really lucky that I got accepted onto a program at Oxford called the Life Sciences Interface Doctoral Training Centre, bit of a mouthful. But effectively what it was a fully funded PhD program where the first year was basically transitioning people from engineering, maths, physics, chemistry into kind of medicine. So basically applying science in the field of in the medical field. So that was lovely, a kind of nice taught masters where we covered a whole range of different subjects. And then at the end of that, we got to choose a PhD in whatever topic we wanted to do. So we did 2 mini projects.
Yep.
Okay, my first mini project, I worked with fruit flies. Okay, and I used to go into the lab and I used to inject these little fruit flies with things. And I won't lie, it was really therapeutic. It was a little bit like cooking, and I was like, yeah, I could do this. Then I did my other project in gait analysis. So one of my tutors at Oxford worked a lot in the knee group, so up at the Nuffield Orthopaedic Centre, kind of in the medical side of things, and worked in gait analysis. So my other project I did with her. So got to the end of that, and I'm like, gait analysis, fruit flies, gait analysis, fruit flies, and the gait analysis one, obviously, because I thought, actually, you know what, I can use this and look at runners and running injuries. So combine my passion for sport with my engineering. And that's what I did. So I remember having my first meeting with Amy Zavatsky, who was my tutor, my supervisor, and I said, I want to investigate running injuries, the biomechanics of all running injuries. And she, as you do, right? You're a little bit naive when you're a young student. You want to research the world. And she said, okay, we might need to narrow that down a little bit. Why don't you choose one injury, and maybe female runners, not all runners. And gradually we kind of narrowed this project down, and my project looked into patellofemoral pain in distance runners. So I took a whole load of runners with patellofemoral pain, a whole load of runners without pain, and then basically measured biomechanics. We also did MRIs of foot structure as well to see if there was anything there that was related to those developing the condition or not. And got to the end of my PhD, and every runner that had come into my lab, Nick, would say, whoa, this assessment's amazing. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what kind of high-end gait analysis is, it's exactly the same technology as they use in the film, animation, and computer game world. Okay, so basically a runner would come into the lab. We had 12 infrared cameras around this massive room. It had force plates in the ground. We had wireless EMG, so we could measure muscle activity. And effectively, we would cover the subjects when they came up with little reflective dots. The cameras don't see the person, they just see the dots. Okay, and the information about the positions of those markers tells us how that person is moving. Okay, so gait analysis gives us a really accurate way of measuring exactly how someone is moving in 3 planes. So imagine side, front, and top-down view. And they would all come into the lab and have this in-depth assessment and say, whoa, Jess, this is amazing. How can my friend have it? Can I go back to my running club and tell them about this? And I was like, well, no, not really, because actually, if you wanted to buy one of these assessments, it would cost you about £3,000. So it's not really appropriate for Joe Blogs. And that just got these, my head thinking. I'm like, why? Why can't we give this to real people? This is the best way of measuring biomechanics that exists, measuring the way that a person moves. Why can't everybody get it? I'm going to try and make that happen. And then that was kind of the start of the Run3D journey, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And for the listener, if they want, they can listen to our previous episode, because myself and Charlie spoke about some of the differences between 2D gait analysis and 3D gait analysis, and using an analogy that technically with the Vicon cameras, we could turn someone into the Incredible Hulk on the screen. But instead, we tend to use a skeleton of that person, because that means more than just a big green monster. And it's also really funny when you talk about all the data, the first thing someone does when you do a 3D gait analysis is sit there and they wiggle, they move, they dance, because it's just that emotional connection of you can see yourself on the screen. And I think that's one of the big USPs about 3D gait, and that it is that person's, that is their individual data. One of the hardest things with 3D gait analysis is not the data, it's actually understanding what that data means and translating it back to clinical practice. Now,
absolutely, yeah.
I most probably am biased because my involvement within Run3D, but I think that's the big thing that Run3D as a company does, because is sort of Run3D. We use the Vicon cameras, but you have built the software to translate that data into very usable diagrams, images, and pictures that we can translate back to patients in under a minute. Also, which to put that into perspective, in the normal lab, it takes you a couple of hours to go through the data, and
hours and hours, Nick, more than that.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Well, I used it for my master's projects, and we had to go through all the raw data, and it was hours and hours of just sifting through. To put it into perspective, in 30 seconds, we'll collect 18,000 bits of data. And imagine just getting that dumped into an Excel sheet and then checking it all. It just takes
Absolutely
time.
Yeah.
So then talk me through this journey about how you then, right, you're in the Gait lab, you're a runner, you're not a clinician, you're interested in how the human body moves and how it runs. And you're right, I'm in this state-of-the-art center that has pressure force plates, it has 18 cameras, and you're sat there thinking, right, now we're thinking, how can we make this available on scale to other people that need it to use when they need it? Talk me through, how did that journey happen?
Yeah, well, I think as with any kind of business idea, in a way, you think, okay, what do I need to do? I know what I need to achieve, right? Okay, so I want to take this same technology and make it accessible in clinical practice. Okay, so there were two main barriers that we had to overcome. The one was the cost of the system. So the lab that I worked at the Oxford Gait Lab, millions. Okay, there is absolutely no way that independent practitioners can pay millions of pounds to have a piece of technology in their clinics. So that was the first thing we had to address. And the second thing that you've already touched upon when we were chatting just now is the complexity of it. Okay, you don't have 9 hours, 10 hours to process data. It's not cost effective. There's no way you would make money from doing an assessment like that if it took you 10 hours to process the data. And B, you don't care, right? You just want results that can be useful to your patient. You don't want to sit there joining reflective dots and working out foot strike and toe off and combining all the cycles. You want all that done for you. Okay, so we then had to reduce effectively a 9-10 hour patient pathway into the click of a button so that you can have your results straight away as soon as you've collected your data, and you can use that data to help your patient. So two things. So in terms of the cost, we just had to reduce the number of cameras, right? The expensive bit is the cameras. So instead of having 12 cameras, we needed to have the minimum number of cameras, which was 3 to operate the system. Okay, so we do treadmill running for those of you who've ever had a Run3D assessment. And to be honest, Nick, I chose to do treadmill running for my PhD anyway. I had a massive lab, multiple cameras. I could have done it over ground. But the reality of it is any runner going to get into their natural running style within 10 meters? The answer is no. Okay, so you choose to put them onto a treadmill anyway. So that was easy. I could cut the number of cameras. And then it was just a matter of developing a bit of a black box. Okay, so that all the individual steps that we would normally do with the data, as I've talked about, you need to filter it, you need to fill the marker trajectories, you need to find foot strike and toe off, we need to chuck out any curves that have gone wrong because they've missed bits of data, and just put that into a little black box so that what you get out of the end of it is the useful stuff. You want to know, how is this person moving at the pelvis, the hips, the knees, and the ankles? What is good and what is bad? Okay, where are they displaying asymmetries? Where are they displaying things that are linked to specific injuries? That's the information you're interested in, not getting there. So that was the other challenge. So two things: reducing number of cameras, and then black boxing the entire data analysis process so that you're left with results and not all the gubbins that goes on in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really good from an engineering perspective to provide that. And then from myself as a clinician, is then the hard task is then, well, you still got the data, you still got to work out what's relevant, because I'm sure you'll agree with me is that when you, I only laughed when he said, right, I want to look at what causes injury in running mechanics when you were a nice younger student. And
Nice.
I was exactly the same. When you realize it's just not that simple, is it? It is sort of trying to correlate mechanics to injury is just, it's just a minefield.
Yeah,
And it can't, we haven't found a way yet to be consistent and reliable. I think we know there are certain characteristics that's the way someone may run if they've got an injury may aggravate an existing injury, but there's no hardcore data yet that shows us that there's still the way someone's run will cause an injury later on
absolutely.
in life. And it's like that's even as Run3D is for the listener, it's what we've even had a look at. We're talking thousands and thousands of gait data, and we still yet haven't been able to find a pattern. And we must be getting Run3D as a company must be getting to the point where it potentially has one of the biggest sort of 3D gait analysis databases out there in existence so far when looking at lower limb running mechanics. And yet we still can't find a way. So it always still comes back to, yes, you've got the data, but it still goes back to you treat the patient, not
Absolutely. Yeah. And I
not the
think,
scam.
but I think the reason it's worked so well, Nick, is actually kind of appreciating where on that my limitations were, right? As you rightly said, I'm an engineer, I'm a mathematician. Yep. My expertise is in like creating this bit of software that can work for you. And right from the beginning, you were heavily involved and Trevor was heavily involved. You guided the clinical application of it. And I think that's probably why it's worked so well, because it's had such input from, you know, the engineers, I guess, in the background doing the maths bit, and the clinicians in the foreground saying, right, we need to measure this. This is how we need to present the data, because this is how I will find it useful as a clinician to treat my patients. And I think that's why it continues to evolve in the way that it does, right? Is because of the feedback from the people who use it. You're the ones who see the patients. You're the ones who treat the patients. So if you say to me, Jess, you know what, can it do this? And I usually say yes, kind of. We could work on that. But you know, then it improves and your treatment practices improve, and you know, that's the way it's always worked. So
I only smiled then because you've got to be hats off to you for dealing with myself and Trevor Pryor, because we were both, and we still are saying, Jess, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we? And your answer is always either yes or it's no, we can't do it at the moment, but there's no reason why we couldn't do that with tweaking the software. And that's a beautiful thing. It is an evolving thing, and that's the beauty of science, isn't it? Is that what we know today maybe outstrips tomorrow because we just know a little bit more that made the last 2 years make much more sense. So having that live database, having that sort of way of thinking, right, how can we keep improving. If that means we've got to change, then we've got to change. So now with your Jess runner hat on, not Jess engineer hat on, for you and I would say you've been very privileged in that your experience of gait analysis is most probably much, much more than the average runner will ever experience because of what you do for a living. Talk me, have there been any sort of changes in as a runner, how you feel about gait analysis now we know what you know now compared to sort of 10 years ago?
Yes, so I'm a big advocate for gait retraining under the right circumstances.
Yep.
Okay. And I think there is a certain advantage to me knowing that how to offload certain structures by changing the way that I run. And I have done that actually with two kind of conditions that I've had, two injuries. Kind of, you boil it back to, okay, doing this loads this particular area, doing this will unload it. And so I do have that advantage, and I can apply that myself. But any other people listening, don't do that without knowing the impact that the way changing you run, way you run will have on everything else. Okay, don't do it without expert advice, because the load is always there, as you know, Nick. And so changing the way that you run will just alter the loading patterns, and so you need to strengthen up the areas that you're going to switch the load to. But it's kind of my understanding of that and my knowledge that has need to do that and treat.
And this is why I'm not a massive fan of good gait, bad gait. No, because I don't know what is good gait, what's a bad gait. Because the thing is that you could run one way and take the load off the ankle, but you may put more load through the knee. You take the load off the knee, you put more, as you correctly said, the load going through the body's a constant. You just shift it from A to B, and it's almost the art of what we do, not the science of what we do, is robbing Peter to pay Paul without taking one away from overloading the other.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes you offload one area and you put too much load through a different area that can tolerate it. So then you got to come up with strategies. Do you then make that area stronger so it can tolerate more? Do you have to look at gait re-education training? And it's becoming more and more of a thing now, this gait retraining. So effectively sort of teaching you to run in a different way. And there's more and more scientific evidence now coming through for certain conditions, especially around knee pain on running and shin pain on running, that making some simple changes to the way you run can offload. And we use it in clinic a lot.
But I think your key point there, Nick, is certain conditions, right? So if you know that a patient has come in with a certain presentation, that the way that they're running is loading that particular area, then you have justification to change it. What I don't agree with is changing the way you run for the sake of changing the way you run. Right? If you're not injured, certainly don't change it.
Yeah, I remember there was a picture going around recently of one of the elite athletes finishing the London Marathon,
right?
And her gait, people sort of said, wasn't ideal, and I don't know what ideal gait actually is, but you're thinking she's about to come in like, I don't know, 2 hours 15, 2 hours 20. You're sort of thinking it doesn't really matter if you can get around a marathon in that quick. It doesn't really matter what your gait is doing. It is working for you.
Well, and also her body has tolerated the training load that she's put through it, but probably 100, 120 miles a week. So that works for her.
And we have it to do gait re-education on someone in clinic. We sort of have a criteria that people must hit before you can do it, because it's not for everyone. Because for me to do gait re-education on someone, you've got to be able to run. You've got to be running on a regular basis, because the only way you're going to change your gait is practicing. It takes practice, and it takes discipline, and it takes a long time. So if we're going to change one parameter, as a general rule of thumb, we say work on one parameter for 1 month. So if there are 3 things that you want to change, expect it to take at least 3 months to do that. And then there's nothing saying, well, actually, when you get fatigued, you may revert back to your old way, but you may find actually, say if you look at a marathon, for example, say half the marathon you can run in a way to offload your knee if you've got a knee issue, but then the rest of the half you revert back. That may be enough to take the load off the knee for half a marathon, so you can do your running without building up symptoms. And it is a very, very useful tool. And there's some elements of gait re-education that you don't need a 3D system for. You can just do looking cadences. And watches like my Garmin here. And this is only a basic Garmin. It will measure cadence, and we actually tested it against the Run3D software and actually found what the watch says or what the camera said. So is actually, in my eyes, the watch data is accurate enough for me.
That can be really useful then if you have a patient in and you've done an assessment and you've understood, okay, this is what we're going to try and change. You can actually measure this yourself now when you go outside, and then we'll bring you back in and just have another recheck, because then you can see the impact that change has on everything else, right? Because even though the patient is changing cadence, that is going to have an impact on pretty much all the other parameters as well in some way. And it's important to understand.
And what I can actually do is I'll put a link to a video that we done to show you, because a lot of people don't know that on your Garmin's, I don't know how it works with different brands, but I know it does for Garmin, you can set alerts up. And
wow.
And so if you want to change your cadence, adjust your cadence, you can set a range that if you go outside of that range, your watch will vibrate on your wrist. And I'll put the link to the video to show you how you can use that in your settings. And you can do the same for pace, you can do the same for your heart rate, you can do the same for cadence. So if you've got a window you want to work with, you can go out and practice it without having to think about it and just feel the vibrations on your your wrist.
Music as well, I think works really well for me.
Music was my biggest thing that helped speed up my cadence, because I was having a few calf issues and actually my cadence was slightly low, so I increased it about, I think it was like 8-9% in the end. So now for me, my cadence will hover around 180 to 185. And I actually went on Spotify. And I love listening to rock music. I just love people shouting around rah, 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 type thing. And there was like running to rock 170 to 190 beats per minute. And then when I look at my runs, my cadence is always in that range. And because I've been using that same playlist for over a year now, if I'm out on a run and my headphones die or something, or I forget them, or I'm running somewhere where I'm along country lanes and I don't feel safe having headphones, I look at my cadence afterwards and it is still, now my body has learned that's become my new normal for me. And touch wood, I don't tend to get any calf related issues. And yes, that will be partly due to the cadence, it will be partly due to me managing my load better, partly due to my strength training. But the point I'm trying to make here is that yes, the gait and the gait reeducation is important, but it's not the whole picture. I don't want anyone listening to this to think, right, I'll change my gait and that's going to solve every problem known to man. It's part of the bigger picture.
Very much so,
isn't it? So try a bit of an awkward question, but actually, where do you see the future going with gait analysis?
Oh, nice one. I think probably coming to more wearable devices, so that you touched a little bit already on the Garmin being able to go out and measure things. I mean, there are accelerometers and things like that which are able to measure certain things. They're still not quite at the level of kind of clinical gait analysis. I think the key to it is, Nick, actually, is we can measure a lot of data with a lot of different technologies, right? Actually, the real barrier to using these things is understanding that data, right? You can give somebody 5 pages or 10 pages. If they don't know what to do with it, that's totally pointless, right? So I think that's where the big barrier is. And for us, obviously, Run3D is only available through clinicians who are expertly trained in how to take this data and make it clinically relevant. Okay, so any technology that doesn't have that, they could give Joe Bloggs as much data as they like, but if Joe Bloggs doesn't know what to do with it, it's completely useless. So I think that actually is the biggest barrier.
And I agree, because the issue is if you get data, and even if you get some technology without training, you run the risk of, right, you do this, so this means you need to wear this shoe or do this and I'm like, we would love it if it was that simple. A human being, it's this term that a phrase I use a lot, but human beings are reliably unreliable. So you need to be able to, I know we want to streamline everything, but I think there are some things that you can't streamline. You just need to take it by an individual basis and actually have a look at what's that runner's goals, what are their needs, why are they having this done, what injuries have they got, and what do they want to achieve. Because someone who wants to get back to running, their goal is to do a park run every week, compared to actually I want to run 10 marathons a year, it is different. The male or female, it's sort of running experience, how much weight training, strength training they
Yeah,
do, diet, sleep. There's all these other compounding variables that
yeah,
can have a big impact. So sometimes I think trying to generalize things too much, it will work for a certain percent, but for a large amount of people,
yeah.
it won't. And it is, wearables are definitely getting there, aren't they? I
Yeah,
think
they
they
are.
are going to be the way
Yeah,
forward.
but still, and also kind of making claims from data those wearables that isn't valid. That annoys me a little bit as well. I'm like, really, seriously, you're going to say that from this? That just doesn't just doesn't add up. But again, tying back that little bit about, you want the data to answer specific questions, right? And that actually, that same principle goes back to research. When you're in the lab, when I started out wanting to answer all running related injuries, I had the ability to measure everything, literally everything I could possibly want to measure on these people. And I can remember my supervisor telling me, that's not the way to do it. Ask your question first. What are you trying to find out? And how and what data will answer that question? If you go
Yeah.
about just measuring everything for the sake of measuring everything, you're going to get into a real mess. And I think that same principle applies to the technologies that we have accessible to runners today. Actually, if your data doesn't answer the question, what's the point in it?
Yeah, I always come back to ask yourself why. Why are you
Mm,
having this done?
yeah,
What's your objective?
yes.
I've always come back to those. Could you say I was actually just finishing reading the book, and we do live in a society now where data, and you can be consumed by data. And we almost got this culture of data is great, but it's actually no, why do you have that data? What does that data mean? Otherwise, you can just get blinded by the data. Someone very good at marketing can spin the data to make it look like it's going to solve every problem known to every runner, but actually it's understanding that why. And it's, you talk about your understanding with gait analysis. I'll openly admit, before I started using 3D gait analysis in clinic, I would have thought I had a good understanding of what the human body done on running. I got the 3D system and quickly realized actually I know very little. And my learning curve and taking this data, because I always sit there and presume, right, I'm going to see a patient do this in clinic. That's going to correlate to that happens when they run.
Mm,
And it's
yeah,
just, it doesn't, unfortunately, we now backed it up with paper and evidence that the way you may move on walking, or the way your muscles or your legs may move sat down or in a chair, has no correlation to what happens when you are going to run. So now
yeah,
when people say to me, "Oh Nick, how do you think I'm going to run?" I'm like, I've got no idea. I'm not even going to
yeah.
guess, because as a human, we're just not good at that. This is where it's almost one of the benefits, I think, of 3D data, is it takes my human element out of it. It allows me to consistently collect data that's repeatable and reliable, but then that data then needs a human element to then turn it into, what does this actually mean? Why has someone had it done? How is it going to benefit you?
And how does it link to what this person has come in with? Why have they come here? Because their knee is hurting. So
Yeah.
what can I take out of this that helps me understand why that knee is likely to be hurting?
And I think that's the big power of gait analysis, regardless if it's 2D or 3D, that often gets overlooked isn't actually the numbers, the angles. It's actually helping a runner or a walker or anyone having it done to understand why they may be getting this problem, to help build a story, to help build this treatment plan of how are we going to get you back to whatever activity you want to do. And that doesn't matter if that's a Sunday walk with the family. It doesn't matter if you want to do the UTMB race events. If it doesn't matter if you want to run a marathon, it doesn't matter what your goal is. It's just helping you understand, because I've got a big belief it's the more someone can understand something, the more likely they are to stick to a treatment plan. and they're going to feel better about it. And I think the psychology around feeling like you're ready to go back to doing something has a big impact on whether you achieve that or not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I think that's a nice place to bring this to a close. I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on and having a chat on the podcast. So please do subscribe to the podcast. If you do have any questions, please let us know. We'll also put all the Run3D information down in the comments, and we shall see you on the next episode. See you later. Bye.